Today, the year ahead for Governor Phil Murphy as he prepares to deliver his State of the State speech, legalizing marijuana, raising the minimum wage, and more fixes to New Jersey transit, just some of the top issues that could overshadow the governor's second year in office. But controversy also shrouds the administration as the investigation into the sexual assault by a former Murphy campaign staffer continues. Today, you'll hear the inside story from the man who ran Phil Murphy's campaign. All that and more with the Roundtable. Democratic strategist Brendan Gill, Republican strategist Jeanette Hoffman, Dan Cassino of the Fairleigh Dickinson University poll, and Bill Spadea, host of Chasing News. It's all ahead on New Jersey Now. Good afternoon, I'm Diane Doctor, and welcome to New Jersey Now. And we're in our new home today. I'm very excited to be here with this A-plus panel in the Montclair Film Festival Auditorium on Bloomfield Avenue in Montclair, one of my favorite towns in New Jersey. Our new home. How many times can I say how happy I am to be here? Also, the People's Republic of Montclair, I think that's what they call it. And how did they let you in, Bill Spadea?
How did I get in? It's a good question, Diane.
Okay. All right, well, we'll explore that later in the show. But first, let's talk about something serious and some of the stories that have been going on this week, ongoing stories. The Select Oversight Committee hearing on sexual assault, the accusation by a former Murphy campaign staffer, Kate Brennan, that one of the highest-ranking members of the campaign raped her, and that he subsequently was given a state job and stayed in that job, if you were to listen to the testimony, far beyond what would have been expected under normal circumstances. So I'm going to start with Bill on this. There's a lot of talk on this, right? And
I think the biggest problem with this is a couple things. One, what did the governor know? When did he know it? And the testimony was all about, well, he didn't know when it was happening. You know, he clearly knew something when that phone call came in, or not the phone call, I should say, the email. So Katie Brennan has this accusation. She expects there to be charges. Charges never come. And she goes through months and months and months trying to get someone's attention. Finally reaches out to the governor and his wife, and in a 40-minute time lapse between the time he got the email, he gets back to her and says, I'm on it, and then gets in touch with two lawyers. Now, I don't know that there's any thinking person that would believe the governor and his wife didn't know something. Why would he get in touch with a lawyer? Why would he get back and say, I'm on it? So there are unanswered questions that I don't think the committee has really gotten to yet.
Okay, well, Brendan Gill, you were on the campaign, ran the campaign, and obviously know a lot of the players involved in it. What can you say about it?
So I think a couple of things. One, there's a couple of factual things that are important to just make clear. Katie Brennan was not a campaign staffer. She was a volunteer on the campaign. This alleged incident happened off-site, had nothing to do with the campaign, and that's important, I think, distinction to make. You know, the testimony and saying all that, I think the minute that the governor received this news, he had a press conference the next day. He said, we stand with Katie, we believe her, and he put a series of things in motion, including cooperating, with this committee to help figure out what happened. And so far, the testimony that's come from the Select Committee matches exactly what the governor has said and what Katie Brennan has said.
But it doesn't really speak well.
I'm not saying there wasn't bad judgment. I'm not saying there weren't mistakes in judgment. What I'm saying right now is the Select Committee, and we're still in the middle of that process, has not put one new fact on the table since the Wall Street Journal story.
No, there are no new facts that the Select Committee put on the table, but there are things that came to light that really raised some serious concerns. One of the first things that jumped out at me was one of the counsel, I guess the attorney for the campaign, had said that there were several complaints raised to the attorney on the campaign that women were not treated well during the campaign. And well, this is what the attorney testified, and this is what he said.
That's not what he testified. No.
I think he said there were three to five.
They were asked they were HR complaints, and they had nothing to do with gender. And that's an important distinction, and I can speak to that. They were not around treatment of women.
But they were HR complaints.
five complaints on a 2-year campaign. We both worked on a lot of campaigns. It's not a lot. You get HR complaints. They were also handled.
Actually, Brennan, Senator Weinberg thought it was a lot of complaints. She was actually surprised, and she even said it's unfortunate. I'm paraphrasing, but that there was a culture. Clearly, there's something about this old boys club and the treatment of women in the campaign. I mean, that was part of the conversation during the committee hearing.
I think that this campaign had more HR processes, and I've been on every campaign in this state, a Democratic campaign, to your chagrin, over the last 20 years. And I've never been associated, not just because I was the manager of that campaign, with a campaign that had more processes in place, had more HR staff, attorney staff, employee handbooks, training, all those things that a campaign should have. I would actually suggest that the fact that there were avenues for people to bring their complaints and there was a process, that's what the attorney to the campaign was testifying to yesterday. He was testifying and saying that there was an HR process, people brought those complaints and they were handled.
Let me just go to Dan for a second, because Dan, how much do the people of New Jersey care about this? How relevant is it?
It's not clear that it actually is making much impact on the public at all. The public is distracted by a lot of other things going on. The big issue for Phil Murphy right now is that this is sapping away at time he should be spending on other things. There's a lot of damaging or at least unpleasant headlines and storylines coming out of this when the governor really wants to be focusing on other things. And we talk to elected leaders, they'll tell you the big peril for an elected leader is you spend every day dealing with the thing that came up that hour or that day, and that distracts you from all the important things you have to be working on that month and that year. And this is turning into a huge distraction, not just for the governor, but for the state legislature, which has a lot of other things it's supposed to be doing. Yeah. Now, this is important, but it also means this is stuff we're not getting to right now.
So does that mean that we should back burner this?
No, I think it needs to be done. We need to have reckoning here. I said there are a couple storylines here that are really upsetting. The first to me is the idea that Alvarez was told repeatedly by different officials, hey, you should quit and find a job in the private sector. So you don't want to fire him because that's going to cause a scandal. So you should quit. And he's told that in May.
And he's
told that
given
in
a raise apparently
and
as
then,
well.
What happens? He doesn't quit until October. So he sticks around.
He quits when the newspaper, when the
Wall Street Journal calls him. The second storyline that I was troubled by is the idea that it seems like from the testimony that the governor's chief counsel was trying to insulate him from this, was telling people, don't talk to the governor about this, talk to me, I'll handle it, to give some sort of plausible deniability potentially, and we'd want the government to be hands-on with this, not to be insulated by a staff.
And something that came to light that I was going to say earlier is the lack of accountability in general from the transition and the Murphy administration. When asked who actually hired Alvarez for his position, the transition chair, Jose Lozano, couldn't actually say who that was.
Right.
So
there was a lot of this going on.
There was a lot of finger pointing. It did not look good for the Murphy administration. Someone else in the Murphy administration, another woman, resigned last week from the EDA, saying she felt retaliated against because she spoke out because someone on the campaign had thrown a chair in anger, and she told that to the Wall Street Journal. She felt retaliated against, she felt left out of meetings, and she resigned from her position in the Murphy administration. That does not speak well to the narrative that the Murphy administration is a good place for women to work.
Well, we could go on like this for a while, but we have to go to a break, and we will pick it up again when we come back. Next, legal marijuana, minimum wage, just some of the issues on Governor Murphy's plate for 2019. Stay tuned. Welcome back to New Jersey Now. We're talking about the Alvarez hearings. We have one more question for Brendan Gill, who managed the Phil Murphy campaign, was in the thick of it, and certainly is in a position to comment on this. Where do you think this ends up?
And I think first and foremost, I think everyone hopes that Ms. Brennan gets the justice that she deserves, first and foremost. Secondly, that the Select Committee, the Attorney General's review of the process, the independent investigation, which hasn't been released yet, leads to some systemic changes, both in policies and procedures of how these issues are handled, so that no one in the future has to potentially go through what Ms. Brennan has.
Okay, well, we'll see how it turns out. Thanks for being here with us to talk about it. And so let's move on to the next thing. The governor has his State of the State coming up in a couple of days. We're going to hear about marijuana, I assume. We're going to hear about the minimum wage. We're going to hear about some of his initiatives. Bill Spadea, Are we going to hear what we want to hear, though, in terms of making the state affordable? And
it depends on who you are, because the governor has said that the way that you lower taxes is to spend more money. So I have not yet figured out how his math works on that. But the challenge is that when you talk about marijuana, the first thing that they talked about was revenue. Then you look at the numbers in Colorado, you're talking maybe on a best day $150 million to the state. We saw the same thing with sports betting, same thing with electronic gaming. All of those revenue projections going back from Christie, and now it's carried into Murphy, have always been way lower than everyone expects. So the challenge is that they're looking for a couple political victories. No one, not in the legislature, not Steve Sweeney, not Craig Coughlin, not Governor Murphy, are talking about the actual core issue of affordability, that people are paying on average almost $9,000 a year in real estate taxes. They're paying some of the highest income taxes, some of the highest fees, tolls, everything goes up. And, you know, I talk to people every morning on the radio. I've got that direct line, literally calls every day. The number one issue is people are saying, I'm sick of it. I don't think my vote counts anymore, and I'm getting out.
Jeanette?
Well, the end of last year, Governor Murphy said he wasn't going to rule out raising taxes in 2019. And that was met with a lot of backlash from the Senate president, from the Assembly Speaker, I believe, from the Republicans. So I think he heard that message loud and clear. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and hope that he starts in 2019 with a very strong State of the State speech and takes affordability into account, because that is the biggest issue, I think, in New Jersey right now. I think New Jersey Transit is going to continue to be a priority, and I think we've discussed this before, that positive train control was a step in the right direction, but we really need to get those trains running on time. So I'm going to be optimistic. I haven't heard the speech yet. Maybe Brendan has. But I'm hoping affordability is going to be at the top of his agenda for 2019.
Brendan, what is at the top of the agenda?
Listen, I think you're going to see a continuation of what the governor's called the Fairer and Stronger agenda. And a lot of the affordability issues that you have touched upon are going to be included. I would argue that the revenue is not what's driving, at least for Governor Murphy, the push towards recreational legalization. He has said the most important thing on that issue for him is the social justice aspect of legalizing marijuana. The sports betting, actually the revenue has exceeded what the projections actually were. So there are a series of things that have to be done in order to strengthen this economy from the inside out. It's really a middle-class tax cut, not a tax increase, when you're talking about having those who can pay their fair share. So a millionaire's tax, which is unbelievably popular in this state and could have real implications from creating some revenue, may or may not be talked about. I'm not sure. And I would, by the way, I wouldn't rule it out as a bad thing to put on the table for discussion to get the finances of this state back on track. One final point, I think we're going to discuss this maybe later on too. You just had yesterday a huge story about a program that the state has been running through the Economic Development Authority, where we have given away $11 billion of our money. That's taxpayer money with very, very limited return. So we want to talk about taxes. We want to talk about, I'm fine to have that conversation, but let's talk about corporate welfare. And let's talk about what we're going to do on that issue in this state.
Brendan, your guy's been in for a year. Part of this is under his watch. And his own Economic Development Authority said, it wasn't as bad as the governor pointed out. There's a contradiction even in the administration right now. And again, with the millionaire's tax, just to point on that, you're talking about 2,600 people. Of course it's popular. 2,600 people out of a state of 9 million. No kidding. The question is, what is the governor doing to take that 2,600 and maybe double that number? Why aren't we attracting wealthy people into this state to offset the real tax burden of the rest of us?
Well, that number is continuing to go up. There are more millionaires in this state than there were 5 years ago, than there were 3 years ago. That number continued to go up. I agree. We should be growing that number. But the idea...
You don't grow up by taxing them out of the state.
Dan, is taxing the rich really that popular?
Taxing the rich is actually very popular among Democrats. It is less popular among Republicans. And among independents in New Jersey, it remains fairly popular. But independents don't matter quite as much because they don't tend to come out and vote. The big issue in New Jersey with the call for affordability is we are a high-tax, high-service state. People like the services. They like what they're getting for their money. What they really care about, I think, is getting value. They don't want their money to be wasted. They're okay with paying the high taxes if they think they're getting high-quality services in return. And that's the problem we're facing, where more and more New Jerseyans think that, boy, I'm not getting, especially out of state government, the things I want to get out of state government. They like the local services, but they don't necessarily trust the state to spend the money the way it needs to.
And regarding the EDA audit, Governor Murphy is very well within his rights to audit that program, and that was a very good move. But let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Tax incentives are a good thing because the growth we've seen in Jersey City, in Newark, in Camden, that wouldn't be possible without the EDA, without attracting businesses here. We just need to make sure that the controls are in place to make sure that the businesses are doing what they're saying they're doing and creating jobs. And that law was put in place by, Senate President Steve Sweeney and Speaker Oliver at the time, who's a lieutenant governor, and I hope the legislature would put some controls in it going forward.
Well, I think the controls are the key, but I also think the key is what is the investment? What is the investment that you want to make? $11 billion exposed through an audit of a program that wasn't started by the Murphy administration. So when you're talking about investments in mass transit, when you're talking about investments in public education, when you're talking about getting to your train on time, there's a lot that $11 billion could have done for this state. And there needs to be, in my opinion, there needs to be an investigation of what happened with that money.
Is there not, though, a perception that the governor is more concerned about issues like giving driver's licenses to illegal aliens than addressing affordability in the state? When what we hear out of Trenton on a daily basis is that the Attorney General is protecting the rights of illegal immigrants while ICE is cracking down on them, and that we're spending a lot of money and a lot of time suing the Trump administration for things that we don't like. Meanwhile, the average person is just looking at their property tax bills go up, their transit system not working, and wondering, is he working for me? Is Governor Murphy working for me? How does he overcome that?
That's mine too.
May as well take. Well, if you want me to, I can take a crack at that and say he has no desire to overcome that. I think that Governor Murphy has shown that he is a part of that disconnected elite, that he does not really understand the plight of the average person that is thinking about how, I have to make a decision between whether or not we're going to pay for new furniture or put new tires on the car, whether or not we can afford the vacation, can I even afford to go out to the movies? I don't think that this administration, and I don't think Steve Sweeney understands it, I don't think Governor Murphy understands it, and the connection of people do live week to week. And we can talk about statistics, but when the average person hears, look, I'm having trouble putting food on the table, and my train doesn't show up, so I can't even get to work, and then I find out we're paying $2 million to help illegal aliens sue our own federal government over lawful deportation orders, and we're paying for them to go to college.
They may not even disagree with the morality behind that.
I think
it's the prioritizing of these things.
Going back to services, if we're not, taxpayers can't afford to send our kids to in-state colleges. People who don't pay taxes are citizens of other countries are getting in-state college for free and are now getting driver's licenses for free. First of all, when you show up to motor vehicle services, how many documentations, how many things do you need for verification?
Right.
How are undocumented illegal immigrants?
I can tell you 9 is not enough. I got turned away. I had to go back just to change my address.
The hypocrisy.
I think we need to let Brendan.
Listen, I would say that the issue of the driver's licenses, that's an issue that does affect everyday residents of this state. That's why the governor has demanded that bill be sent to his desk. He is fully on board because it is the right thing to do, and it also helps middle class and those who are aspiring to be in the middle class get there. It's that simple. The lawsuits that the Attorney General has undertaken, he said it, and this is the thing you have to understand about the governor, is that he's executing on the agenda that he presented during the campaign. He said he was going to do these things. So Bill, you might disagree, but the majority of New Jerseyans, I mean, maybe not the ones calling your show, but the majority of New Jerseyans voted for that agenda, and he's
the majority of the ones that voted.
But he's following. But Chris Christie.
We can argue about that, but he's following through on his agenda. He's following through on what he said he was going to do. So I think that for him, he has to, he maybe has to articulate that better, maybe he doesn't, but on issues of the driver's licenses, on issues of suing the federal government and standing up to the Trump administration when he thinks that they're implementing policies that are against the best interests of New Jerseyans, he said he was going to do that, and he's doing it.
Brendan, isn't he just counting on the fact that 3.5 million people didn't vote in the last election who were eligible? So he's talking to this small base of people that are radicalized, they don't like Trump, Trump. They are more interested in politics than policy.
I gotta say, I'm nonpartisan, right? But if I were a Republican, I would be thrilled that Governor Murphy is putting all this effort into these smaller issues, like driver's license for undocumented immigrants, like suing the Trump administration, because that appeases the liberal base and opens him up to make compromises with the state legislature on bigger issues that actually matter more, I think, to the everyday lives of people in New Jersey. These are symbolic issues, but that's all they are. They are symbolic. Now, they may have some benefit for certain people, and that's great, but they are there politically to help them with that liberal base. And that frees them up to do stuff that Republicans might like, or Republicans will be able to work with them on other issues.
Okay.
I'm going to suggest something that might be a radical idea. He might actually believe in what he's doing. Okay, I know that's a concept of
Brendan, I agree with you. He is a left-wing ideologue, no doubt.
But my point is, though they're not left-wing ideas, they're mainstream ideas. A $15 minimum wage is a mainstream idea. It's a mainstream idea.
Not for mainstream businesses.
It's a mainstream idea. It's a mainstream idea in the state. Legalizing marijuana is a mainstream idea. It's not a radical idea. Addressing college affordability is a mainstream idea.
Giving money to illegals to go to college is not a mainstream idea.
Okay, we're gonna have to hold it at that. We'll be right back. Next, Montclair is home to the famous and not so famous. We'll share our picks next. Stay tuned. We just have a few minutes left, and it's been a great discussion today from our new home here at the Montclair Film Festival. So I thought it fitting, because we are in Montclair, to all of us cite our favorite Montclair resident. I'm not a sports fan, but I gotta go with Yogi Berra. My favorite line is always go to other people's funerals, otherwise they won't come to yours. So, well said, Yogi. And Bill, I know you've got somebody.
I do. I thought about this long and hard, and I've got to go with Brendan Gill for a couple of reasons. One, Brendan did not. He's one of the only ones that didn't make fun of my socks today, so that's first. But in a very serious point, there are very few people that can talk on one side of the aisle or the other without the vitriol, stay measured, and be articulate about it, and have a conversation. I think what we're missing today is there's no conversation. So we agree on some things, we disagree on more, I'm sure, than we agree on, but the idea that you can have a conversation, you've been consistent through your entire career as a freeholder, now head of the freeholder board, campaign manager, and I value that, because it is about the conversation. We're never going to agree on 100% of the things. So Brendan is my
Well, you can't say that Bill's your favorite Montclair resident, because he doesn't live here.
I do not.
And is barely allowed to come.
They voted, they said, you're only allowed here once to do this show, that's it.
So first of all, thank you. I appreciate that, Bill. Thank you, and feeling is mutual. For sure on that discussion. I'm actually going to go with a much more localized person, and one for the home team, so to speak. I am born and raised in this community. I think it's a great community. I'm very lucky to be able to still live here. But the person who sparked my interest in public service and politics and government is my father. His name is Dan Gill. He just started his 48th year teaching social studies and history in Montclair public schools, and he might not be a household statewide name, but I can assure you that in the community of Montclair, Mr. Gill, not me, when somebody says Mr. Gill, you know in this town who they're talking about.
Well, I'm sure he's very proud of you too.
So I appreciate that. Thank
Jeanette?
you.
So my favorite Montclair resident is Bobby Brown, owner of Bobby Brown Cosmetics, because she makes me look good every day.
And she's right down the street here with her studio. Yeah. And Dan?
So I thought about this because I wanted to nerd out a little bit. So we've got one of the most important comic book artists of the Golden Age, a guy named Russ Heath, who's from Montclair. You've all seen his work because he's the guy Roy Lichtenstein stole all those beautiful panels from when he blew them up. Or one of the greatest science fiction writers of the 20th century, a woman named Anne McCaffrey, who's a great Montclair story because she's from Montclair and then fled to get away from high taxes to actually wind up living in Ireland. But I'm actually going to have to go with Bill Bradley, who's both a basketball hero and a hero in the Senate.
No, it's somebody we've heard of.
And bipartisan, of course, because if you like Ronald Reagan's tax reform, that was Bill Bradley's bill to start with.
Okay, I'll give you the last word. Dan, thank you for joining us today on New Jersey Now. Thank you to the Montclair Film Festival for letting us in the door. We'll be back next week with another edition of New Jersey Now. Have a great day.